Welcome to the Literary Escape podcast, the only podcast that serves both readers and authors of historical Christian romance. We read, discuss, review, and rate books in this unique romance subgenre, and sprinkle in a few contemporary Christian suspense books. Authors, we bring you inside tips and tricks from those who have gone before you. Then we bring both readers and authors together for fun-filled live Q&As. Literary Escape is the one-stop shop for both readers and authors to connect, learn, and grow together. Let's dive into this adventurous episode. Welcome to a bonus episode featuring author Sandee Taylor's debut novel, More Than an Attractive Face. But first, a few announcements before we chat with Sandee. We are just 10 days away from the launch of Unwavering Faith. On February 1st, we will release the paperback and ebook of Unwavering Faith. It has been an exciting journey, and I cannot wait for you to enjoy Brody and Claire's adventurous love story. For my friends who enjoy audiobooks, we hope to have that ready for launch mid-February. Originally, I was going to just narrate the entire book. However, when I went back through the recordings, I realized I would rather have different voices for each character. So thanks to many family members and friends, we will bring you a dynamic audiobook that I hope you will enjoy. If you're on my newsletter list, then you have seen the many unboxings we've enjoyed over the past few weeks as books, t-shirts, mugs, and totes have arrived on our doorstep. You can check out all we have to offer at literaryescape.com/shop. Then stay up to date with all the happenings at Literary Escape by signing up for our newsletter at literaryescape.com/newsletter. We have 2 book club extravaganza events coming up for you as we celebrate the release of Unwavering Faith. The first event will take place on February 15th at the Branch Coffee Shop in Fairmount, Indiana. Author Abby Downey will be joining me, and this is just an incredible opportunity to sit down with authors, enjoy a cup of coffee, and chat about books and play bingo. We hope to see you there. For those who do not live close to Indiana, I will host the online book club extravaganza on February 22nd, and we will be chatting about books and playing bingo. You can learn more about these events and get your tickets at literaryescape.com/events. And finally, when you visit literaryescape.com/events, you will also find all our coffee and books events for 2025. We have some incredible authors coming to chat with you this year. These are free events. You just need to RSVP to get the link to join each chat. Now, for this special bonus episode, I am thrilled to introduce you to author Sandee Taylor. She is a member of HCRW, which is our historical Christian romance writers group. Sandee just released her first indie published novel, and it has been a joy to be part of her writing journey and watch her incredible story come to life. Sandee is also an active member of the Kansas Authors Club and enjoys working with fellow writers. Enjoy this chat with Sandee Taylor. Welcome, everybody, to this special bonus episode with author Sandee Taylor. I am so excited to have her on today because she is also part of our HCRW group. So I've been able to kind of see this book get fine-tuned over the last several months. So it's just exciting to see it finally in print. So welcome, Sandee.
It's great to be here.
Awesome. So can you just share a little bit about how you got into writing?
Well, actually, I taught English for many years in the middle school. And so I kind of piddled around the edges with writing with kids, but I never really wrote myself. When I started writing was actually when I retired, and my mother-in-law had a fall, which resulted in a traumatic brain injury, and she had to be taken care of 24 hours a day. We actually had to have eyes on her 24 hours a day because we did not know what she would do. So I took the night shift, and I had a recliner, and I sat in the recliner and I started blogging. And I fell in love with writing at that point as I was blogging and coming up with graphics to go along with the blog posts. And so that's how I got started.
Can I ask what you blogged about?
It was spiritual things, and a lot of times it was verses that related to what I was experiencing at the time.
Oh, I bet that was very helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure.
I
Is
don't
it
know about
still
that, but it helped me.
yeah, is it still active or
Well, you could still find it, but it's actually, if you go onto my website and you bury deep enough into blog, I transferred all of that stuff over. So they're way deep in there. I just couldn't throw them away.
Sure, I completely understand, and bless you for being a middle school teacher. It takes a very special person to teach middle school, and I can say that because I am a teacher.
Yeah.
And I dabbled in middle school, but I stayed at the elementary. Those kids need someone that have a lot of patience for sure, and remembers what it was like to go through all those changes, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for that, for doing that, reaching those kids. So you kind of answered this one already, but sometimes we talk about, did you always want to be an author? Like in the back of your mind, was that something there or not really?
No, I really didn't. I kind of fell into it. I mean, I always kind of wanted to piddle at writing, but I wasn't thinking about writing a book. But in my retirement, our local community college has a program called Life Enrichment, and they bring in speakers once a month. And one time there was a Black lady, and I wish I could remember her name, but I can't. And she came in and she was talking about the Underground Railroad in Kansas. I was totally taken aback because I've taught Kansas history. I knew a little bit about Kansas history, and I did not realize we had a very active Underground Railroad in Kansas. And I always thought it was back east. And so I became kind of interested in that and started really looking at Kansas history some more. And about that time, I was kind of interested in looking into some of my family history. And I had family that came from Morrisville, Indiana, and Northern Kentucky. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to write a story there and I'll have a runaway slave family in that. And we are going to let the story develop. I really fell in love with Kansas history at that point. I actually wrote a book at that point that was about that family and their experience with encounters with a runaway slave. So literally, that was my third book that I'd written. Before that, after I'd finished blogging and my mother-in-law passed away, I actually wrote two very bad books, and I knew they were very bad, and I was not going to publish them. So this book really grabbed my heart. And I really loved it, loved the content. So then I wrote a sequel to it, which is a stupid thing to do. When you start off writing a book, you should not write sequels, okay? Anyway, but I wrote a sequel to it, which brought in the Bleeding Kansas era, which was really the Civil War in Kansas before the Civil War was fought, and started exploring all of that. And then I wrote Lawrence, Kansas area, and Eastern Kansas area during the Civil War. And that was really a very intense time. And I wrote two-thirds of that book. A lot of violence. It was pretty, I got tired of the blood and guts. I'm sorry. I did.
Yeah.
And I had my doctor, my army doctor, down in southeast Kansas, and I couldn't figure out how to get him back home to Lawrence. So I was stymied. I knew I needed to give him back, and everything I tried didn't work. So I said, I'm taking a break. I am going to write something fun. And so I wrote the historical romance, and it is my two main characters through the other three books and how they came together. So, this book, More Than an Attractive Face, actually was written fourth, but it's the first book in the series.
And you were right when you said it's really hard to do that, isn't it? To write backwards in a series.
Some of the series is having to be rewritten.
Because I think you would agree with this statement. Our characters sometimes take on a mind of their own and
Yes.
and take you places you didn't plan on them going.
Absolutely. One of the characters that started off in the second book, when I was originally writing, which was the first book at that time, I had set him up to be kind of a bad husband, an alcoholic, kind of abusive. And he turned out to be a sweetheart and absolutely a stable part, and really was the reason why the family was able to protect the fugitive slave family, because he came from northern Kentucky. He understood what they had faced and how to deal with them. Anyway, yeah, he really, I mean, he did 180 from what I originally thought he would be.
Yeah. So that kind of leads us into the next question, where it's, did any of your characters surprise you? So he surprised you. Did any of your others surprise you along the way?
Okay, he's in the second book. So, in the first book, of the book that I now have published, the one character that surprised me, we'll quit talking about the future books. But the in More Than an Attractive Face, the character that surprised me was Mrs. Malroy. And I had put her in one chapter fairly early in the book because I wanted some comic relief, something a little bit humorous. And I showed the chapter to my husband, which he reads all of my chapters. And he goes, "I like Mrs. Malroy. I can't wait to see what happens with her." And I'm going, whoops. So I had to invent ways to get her into the book later on that were not in my planned story, but I fell for her. She's really a fun character.
It's always interesting sometimes how those side characters can sneak on more pages than we intended them to be
Yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What about scenes or characters that were difficult to write?
For me, there were two types of scenes that were most difficult to write: the ones that had passion in them and the ones that had violence in them, because those are very hard, or at least it is for me, to get the emotion into them. So I finally gave up and I just wrote them very graphic. I wrote them as graphic as I could possibly write them. Then I pulled back and I started pulling words out. And so I pulled out as many words as I could to keep the tension, but I want the reader to visualize it. So I pulled out a lot of words. Those were really I spent a lot of time on the violence and on the passion scenes.
And I know you did quite a bit of research on one specific scene in there, even, reading other authors and how they wrote those types of scenes as well. So I know you've really done your homework on it, and it shows in your writing. In the bits that I've been able to read, I haven't been able to read it in its entirety yet, but
Yeah.
I will soon.
Well, the violence thing, oh, what is a fight right? Right, fight right. Anyway, Coke.
Yes.
I think.
Fight
Anyway,
right. Yep.
yes, I read that book. I used a lot of the information from there. I was able to get a interview with her through some online thing I was doing at some point. And she told me it doesn't happen in this book. It happens in the book number 2, that when the gun dropped to the ground, it would have fired twice. Well, I didn't have it that way. I only had it firing once. I mean, she gave me hints like that with things that you don't know. And from her, I also learned that when a knife hits a body, if you hit it with motion, that it will pull the knife out of your hand. I wouldn't have thought that. So, there are little details that if you have not experienced a knife fight, you maybe need to talk to somebody that knows something about fighting with a knife. So I did that. I didn't want to have a knife in my story. I wanted a derringer. I wanted a small derringer that she could put in her pocket. So I started doing some research and found out you didn't have derringers in 1837. They were flintlock guns, and they would have been very large. And so she couldn't keep it in her pocket. I wanted a revolver, no less, and they really weren't available then. So they didn't come available until mid 1800s to late 1800s. So that's the reason why I ended up with a knife in my story.
And this is 1830s, correct?
1837 and 38.
Okay. And at this point, this is the family starting off in Indiana. They haven't moved to Kansas yet, right? Book 1 is starting there. Okay.
Book 1 and almost all of book 2 is, well, actually, probably 90% of book 2 is in Morrisville, Indiana. Getting it all set up, setting up the scenes, setting up the, I don't know, the temperament, the atmosphere in the country at that time. I had a very hard time because I am very empathetic. I don't think I'm a prejudiced person, at least not openly prejudiced. I try not to be. But I had a hard time understanding how the people of that era, even though they did not want slavery, they did not want integration at all. They wanted everybody separated and were very intolerant of not being separated.
And those are hard topics, I think, sometimes to address in a fiction book as well, to address it well.
I found it challenging to the terms too. That's not in this book. I'll wait and talk to you about that in the next book.
We're getting excited. The thing is, Sandee and I work together in our critique group through HCRW, and so we've already seen what's coming next a little bit.
Right. And I just now gave my second book to the beta readers. So I've been really working on it. So I'm having a hard time keeping the two books separated in my
Yes,
mind.
and that happens, which is exciting for your readers because those books are going to come out close to each other.
I hope.
Is the goal. Yeah.
Mhm.
Did you have a favorite character that you wrote?
Yeah, it was Elizabeth. She's my main character. She's a strong woman. I wrote her to be a strong woman. She is a woman of integrity. She tries to do what is right. And I had to work at finding flaws. I had to give her some flaws, not make her too perfect. So that was kind of a challenge too. But I really love that lady.
She is an enjoyable character. Of what I've read of
Mhm.
her, I do enjoy her. I enjoy her friend, Melissa, as well.
Yes. Melissa has more challenges and she's a little bit younger and she has some emotional challenges based on some of the less pleasant things that happen in the book.
Hmm. Yes. And I don't just like her because she has my name. I think
No,
she's an interesting character.
she's an amazingly talented person.
Hmm.
Amazingly talented person, as you are.
Thank you. So, are there any, you kind of shared some fun facts. Well, I wouldn't know that, I guess I couldn't say they were all fun, but any fun facts you came across during your research that just really stuck with you?
I don't know as fun per se, but I wanted Elizabeth to leave New York on a railroad train and go to Indiana. Well, I discovered that couldn't happen until okay, didn't get to Indianapolis until 1847. So I was too many years. So I had to bring her uh, I had to figure out a way to get her across country on a wagon safely. That was a bit of a challenge. I already mentioned about the revolver. I wanted her to have a dog and I looked at the different breeds and I wanted a small dog, and small dogs really were not very popular at that time in the United States. But on the eastern United States, the rich families were starting to raise or acquire pugs, and her family was very rich banking family, and her grandfather had traveled to England. This is backstory. Traveled to England and had purchased pugs because the royal family raised pug dogs. And so Elizabeth has a pug. In the frontier, they were unheard of. They were, just you didn't have them. So anyway, that was kind of a fun thing to research and come up with. What I found more challenging than anything else were words. And I have found 2 or 3 words that were not period words that are in my book that I didn't learn about until after the book was published. And it's just going to have to be a mistake. But things that I found a hard time working around were words like okay, teenager, adolescent. Those were all words that were not used in the 1800s. I thought a good word to describe somebody as not very attractive would be scallywag. Scallywag. Couldn't do it because it wasn't used until 1854. Frustration. Words like wedding reception wasn't used until 1856. Engagement ring until 1840. Those were all things that I wanted to use and I couldn't. Now, what I found interesting about the engagement ring was they really didn't have them until late 1880s and were not popular in the United States until engagement rings. They had wedding rings, but not engagement rings. So I had him give her a ring as a gift. I didn't call it an engagement ring. I wanted a ring.
I know, did at one point were you toying around with a brooch?
We have a brooch in there, and
Okay.
she wears a brooch. It is kind of her security blanket. Dolly, the pug dog, is her security blanket, her constant companion, but also the brooch. The brooch belonged to her mother. And her mother is dead. Her mother died in a boating accident when she was 12. And she wears that brooch all the time. And throughout the book, anytime that she is needing comfort, needing her mother, thinking about her mother, her hand goes to her brooch.
Yeah. I thought there was a brooch in there, and I remember the conversation about they didn't have engagement rings back then.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of time and research that goes into that to try to make it period accurate. And the further back you go, the harder that becomes.
Yes, but it's interesting. You run across all kinds of little tidbits, little details. I mean, things like what did they use as painkillers for sure? I wanted to have a laudanum powder, but it was a liquid that was common. I needed to have her have a cast, but they weren't really using casts at that time. So we had to figure out a way to splint her broken arm. And we did that with leather, and that worked just fine. So I had to find ways to work around common things. And I hope I have it totally accurate. I tried really hard to get it accurate, but
And I know you know your stuff because you've helped me with some of my stuff as well to say, I don't think they would have had this at that time. And I know we're a few years apart in our stories, but our timelines. Are there any fun behind the scenes tidbits you'd like to share that maybe you haven't already?
no.
I was to say you've shared quite a bit so far, so I figured you probably already covered that. So what do you hope your readers get out of the novel?
I hope that readers come out of it with an understanding of the importance of family and integrity and faith and community. Those are all things that I interweave within the whole story. And I hope that they see that. This is very definitely a Christian novel. I have verses in it, I have prayers in it, but it's not preachy. It is just an integral part of what they do. For example, one time when Elizabeth is correcting the boys who misbehave on the playground, she quotes a Bible verse to them. I can't remember which one it was now, but she does that. I mean, it's just like a natural part. That's how she would have disciplined the children because she was a woman of faith.
Yeah. I love it. So, can you share just a little bit about the things that you're doing around the launch of your book? Because I know you've got an online Zoom meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, I am having a physical launch for my book coming up on January the 27th at our local used bookstore, which is all we have in El Dorado. We're a small community. And that's for my local friends, local relatives, that type of people. Then I am having a Zoom launch on February the 5th. And I have one of my Kansas Author Club friends actually running that for me. And that's for like my friends that live out of town, my Kansas Author Club friends, specifically out of town relatives, that type of thing.
Is there a sign up for that or is it by invitation only?
That is basically by invitation only. I will put out because I don't want to put the Zoom link out there and get somebody breaking in that shouldn't be there. I will be putting that out on, well, I am District 5 president of Kansas Authors Club, and I'm very active in the Kansas Authors Club state level. So I have access to newsletters and that kind of thing. So that will go out on that. It will also go out on my newsletter, my personal newsletter, a Joyful Living newsletter. And so that's kind of the way it's going to happen.
Okay. All right. So, what are some other ways that authors can, or I'm sorry, let me start that question again. What are some ways our listeners can connect with you?
Well, through my website, you can find how to become a part of my Joyful Living newsletter. And once you get started there, of course, you have my email address and you can email me that way. I have a Facebook page called Sandra Lou Taylor Writes. So if you're on Facebook, search me for Sandra Lou Taylor Writes. And that's two very good ways to get a hold of me. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, but I don't engage in those very often.
And I'll have links to Sandee's website and Facebook page as well in the post for this episode. And I will say, Sandee does a ton with the Kansas authors out there, and she's gotten awards for her time and efforts. And you do a lot of speaking engagements as well out there
Not
for.
yet. I lead a lot of groups. I lead
Okay.
a lot of critique groups. I have several of those are small groups. As far as speaking engagements, I have done a smattering of speaking engagements. I would like to do more. And I would really like to connect through book clubs with people. I would do Zoom book clubs as well as local book clubs.
Yes, and Sandee would make a wonderful guest as
Thank you.
well for any book club. And I am looking forward, Sandee, to getting your book and finally getting to read it in its entirety from front to back.
In sequence.
Yes.
For those of you out there, I would be having a problem with a chapter, and it may be a chapter that was 3 chapters before the last one she read. So it was not necessarily in sequence.
Yeah, so I am definitely looking forward to that. And I will have a link to Sandee's book in the blog post for this episode as well. So, Sandee, go ahead.
Can I make some announcements? I have a couple. Okay.
Yes, you go right
This
ahead.
book is available in paperback and Kindle format right now. And as of today, I have my audio book voice person is almost finished with my audiobook. We only have 4 more chapters left. So we're on target to have the audiobook available by the middle of February, if not before. So I'm very excited about that for all of you who like to read to audiobooks.
That is wonderful. And I know you're thrilled with your narrator.
Yes,
You've
she's
shared
doing
that
a
before.
nice job.
That's wonderful. All right. So all those links, I'll make sure everyone can get to those. If you visit the blog post, you'll get all those links. And Sandee, I am so glad you got to join us for this bonus episode. And I'm looking forward to having you back on, hopefully in June for book 2.
Or July, June or July.
June or July. Okay. So maybe sometime this summer for book 2.
Definitely.
Okay.
This has been fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, please consider sharing our podcast. Every share helps us reach more readers and authors like you. Until next time, happy and blessed reading and writing.